Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session all about unlocking your ERP data. We're really excited to talk about leveraging all your Quickbase tools to get the most out of your big data ERPs like SAP. And before we get started, there's a quick key question that we need to answer. And that's really just, why would you even want to do this? Well, I'm guessing that some of you are joining us because you already have a use case in mind. But for those of you who don't, it really comes down to Quickbase's ability to help in just three main areas. The first is increasing your operational agility, and that's really by giving yourself the ability to create flexible processes around all the different data that might exist in your ERP. The next one is customizing and automating your workflow across all the different tools in your ecosystem. And then, of course, it's really important to be able to accelerate your delivery of innovative new ideas, which can really have an impact on both your business objectives and also your quality of life. So we think some pretty great benefits. And just by way of introduction, for those of you I haven't had the opportunity to work with before, my name is Adam Hoover. I've actually worked here at Quickbase for about 8 years now. And a lot of that time I've spent working with customers like yourselves on all sorts of different situations and challenges, including integration with various ERPs. And today I'm actually joined by my colleague, Peter.
Hey, Adam, good to be here with you. I'm also a solutions consultant with Quickbase for about 5 years. Really excited to share what's been done creating workflows with SAP. I'd love to know, what can we expect from today's session?
Yeah, well, today we're really focused on talking about some of the key things that everyone's going to need to consider when they're trying to integrate with their ERP. And what are the questions they really need to make sure they ask when they're creating an integration plan? So to do that, we're going to cover a few main items. We'll give everyone a little background on ERPs in general to help get things started. And then we'll also talk about SAP and a few specific questions that folks can ask to make the process of integrating with SAP in particular a little easier. And then we'll review some tips on how to actually plan that use case out before we jump into the demo use case that you've put together for us today, Peter.
Awesome.
Yeah, and to that point, I actually think this is going to be a great session if everyone comes away with the feeling that Quickbase provides a fantastic set of tools that help connect and extend the value of their ERPs. But there isn't a native SAP channel in Quickbase pipelines. So it's really important to remember that it's only going to be possible to have that great experience if you've done your research and if you've put together a solid plan, where you've mapped out your ecosystem, you're making sure to collaborate with the right stakeholders, you've got the right tools in place for the right jobs, and you've also kind of done a little bit of forecasting to try to identify any potential risks that you may need to watch out for.
Yeah, that makes total sense, Adam. Is there anything else that we're going to be needing to know before we get into it?
Yeah, well, I think just a little bit of housekeeping. Of course, everyone's joining us today on On24, and that offers a ton of options for customization in your interface. So you can kind of see a little bit about how you can use that here on the slide. But I did want to call out that you can also find a how-to in our related content section, and that we'd also really love to have everyone using the Q&A widget. So if you've got questions throughout the session or maybe at the end, send them in through that Q&A function. We'd love to answer those. We are going to be planning to spend some time going through them at the end of the session today.
Awesome. Let's get into it. So Adam, I hear this term all the time, ERP, practically every single day working with our customers. Can you help everyone joining us understand what's the term mean and why is it a key part of most businesses?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. A lot of folks may actually already know this, but ERP actually stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. And while that may not be the most intuitive term, I think you can think of ERPs as really just collections of different software tools and modules that kind of all work together to collect data from all the different areas of your business and centralize that in one really heavy duty repository. So you can kind of see on the diagram here, whether you're in services and finance, asset management, you're all working on a unified set of data. And that really helps facilitate a lot of the different use cases across all the different departments in your organization, that really depend on each other to work cross-functionally, to report cross-functionally. And then, of course, for those even more experienced folks out there, it is key to remember that the data that you might need to reference is probably also being used at the exact same time by other teams all over your company. So there's a reason why these systems have become so big and complex over time, and it's because they're really meant to house information that runs your entire business. So a really cool concept that's evolved over many, many years into one of the most, I would say, pillar cornerstone types of technologies for any enterprise company out there.
Okay, so an ERP is kind of a core technology for running a business, and some of the components that you've laid out here. So how should I think about preparing my environment for integration?
Yeah, well, I think the first step is going to be actually just to get familiar with which tools, or in this case, ERPs actually exist in your environment. We've worked with customers who use all the different ERPs you see here, from Microsoft Dynamics to Oracle NetSuite and everything in between. And I've even worked with a few customers that actually have multiple ERPs and they're running them at the same time, maybe because of a merger, or, they're going through a migration, for example. So, actually one of the things I have found over the years is that it's just really important not to make any assumptions about where your data may actually live. You have to get to know your environment if you want to plan a successful integration use case.
Okay, so key takeaway, get to know my environment. That makes a lot of sense. And you've made ERP sound pretty awesome. So then that begs the question, why would anyone actually need to move information outside of an ERP?
Oh, yeah, well, you're absolutely right to call that out. It might not be obvious, because most modern ERPs are incredibly powerful and offer all sorts of benefits, from their ability to scale and handle increasingly large data sets, and really scale that well into the future. Their ability to be compliant and make sure that you're compliant and easy to audit. A key thing that I often hear is also their accuracy. If you're running reports, that the information in your ERP is the source of truth. That's the accurate place to get your data from. And that often leads into this last point of forecasting. So tons of benefits. So it's hard to imagine what they might not do well, but you can kind of see on the right that there are a few things. And that's just because there's never been a tool that can be the right tool for every situation. So ERPs, they're purpose-built to manage all these big data use cases. They provide those benefits I just mentioned. But as a result, they also have these limitations around agility, where they're not easy to customize. And it's not easy to customize tools that use data in ERPs either. Often you're forced to use a pre-built module, or if you want something custom, you're really stuck if you don't have any other tools to leverage. The other thing is access. Of course, we want data to be secure. It's an incredibly important thing, especially for businesses in highly regulated industries. Compliance is really important as well, but it can really slow things down for your different functional groups and teams when they don't have access. And then, of course, the one that no one likes to talk about, but is true of every company I've ever worked with, is dependencies, right? No process exists in a silo. Whether it's finance working with sales, working with our different procurement teams, everyone works cross-functionally. Every process has something that it touches, and those dependencies, often when you're dealing with ERPs, can really limit your ability to customize your business processes. And if you do need to make those kinds of customizations to unlock key new workflows or ideas, it can often be really expensive to implement. You're talking about bringing in a third-party consultant. Sometimes that expense can really go sky high really quickly. And that's actually, I think, a great kind of reason why we should talk about Quickbase, because that's where Quickbase comes in. It gives you that ability to customize apps in an agile way, to really help your business to become, I think, a little bit less dependent on all the different, departments that are out there, to kind of allow you to move a little bit more quickly, gets you access to data, all at a much lower cost to implement.
Okay, so that was really helpful, Adam, and I understand ERPs now in much more depth, as well as when you'd want to maybe augment an ERP to get some more of that agility or flexibility to customize workflows. But I know we're talking today about SAP. So if we're working with someone in an SAP environment, and interested in connecting to it, what's the first thing that we should know?
Well, I think the main thing to know is that it's really not just one SAP that you may be dealing with. SAP, often people who aren't familiar with it use it as kind of a term and they're referring to a specific tool, but SAP is kind of a blanket. I mean, it's the name of the company. And over the years, you can see they've offered a ton of different versions of their core ERP software. Right now, we're on their latest and greatest SAP S4Hana, but what you'll find is a lot of companies are not actually on the latest version yet. And so it's really important to start by going and finding out, what does my environment look like? And you'll see, it's not too surprising to find people still on R3 or ECC. I've come across a few folks who are even on some of the older versions. And so don't be fooled just because you see 1982 or 1992 here on the slide. Doesn't mean that these tools aren't still out there in the ecosystem, creating value, and running really well. But of course, which one your organization is currently using will really, really dramatically impact your integration options and strategy. So important to start by figuring out, what does your environment look like? What version of SAP are you on? And one thing I will mention is that, I know SAP is encouraging pretty heavily all of its customers to migrate from any of the older versions that you might see out there to S4HANA over the next few years. And so if you haven't done that yet and you find, hey, we are on an older version, but we're being pushed to start that migration process, often that's actually a fantastic time to start thinking about what are the other tools in your ecosystem, and how can, as we implement S4HANA, how can we think about maybe implementing new Quickbase apps to supplement that, and really get the environment where it needs to be, so that once we're done with that migration effort, we're ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah, and that really resonates with me. I actually also see a lot of SAP ECC 6 still out there. So the takeaway I'm getting is know your environment, and there's a lot of them out there. But if we're working with someone that's on a modern version of SAP, how does that environment actually look?
Yeah, well, a modern SAP ecosystem really has S4HANA at its core, but you'll then see that there's a ton of different tools that it then works with to provide specialized services to different functional areas of your business. So, with S4HANA as that central repository, then you'll see something like Ariba or SuccessFactors, if maybe you're dealing with an HR management use case. We actually often come across, and we ourselves use Concur, if you're tracking expenses and things along those lines. And then the other thing, of course, Quickbase is all over the ecosystem as well, filling some of those gaps where, if you've got different processes in your supply chain, in your, legal management, or anything in between, Quickbase is often being used to fill in those gaps. And so whether you know it or not, you may already have Quickbase applications that are technically integrated in as part of this SAP ecosystem.
Okay, so we have this ecosystem with S4HANA at the nucleus, as you called it, and Quickbase working together to meet a team and organization's various digital needs. Is there anything else that we need to consider that might add a wrinkle to this story here?
Yeah, I will say the last thing to really watch out for is that not all S4HANA instances are exactly the same either. Now, there is a difference between what SAP has as far as their managed cloud offering, where they're really offering you S4HANA as a SaaS service, right? So it's a hosted service that they will provide you. Often, companies that are migrating are going to be looking at the other option, though, which is their any-premise offering, where you can actually host S4HANA on any infrastructure, whether that's your own, or if you wanted to put that up in a public cloud offering like AWS or any other cloud vendor of choice, you'll actually have the ability to do that. And of course, that is a great set of options to give you some flexibility based on your business and where its history has come from with SAP. But it does offer some complexity once again as we think about these integration use cases. And I will say that as far as the cloud offering and the on-prem offerings are concerned, there's no one clear winner as far as which is better. It's really going to be dependent on your requirements. So, if you're looking into this and you're wondering, hey, why do we have cloud? Well, maybe the needs from your business are just more focused around the ability to kind of stay up to date all the time, that highly standardized set of offerings, the cloud ready tools that SAP is offering you out of the box, versus if you're still hosting it on-prem or you've got it up in a public cloud somewhere that's self-managed, maybe your business is really focused on a high degree of control. And so kind of where it's hosted will not only tell you a little bit about where you'll need to be integrating, but also about sort of some of the priorities that your business may have at a high level. So that is one wrinkle that you'll need to watch out for that's SAP specific.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I'm taking away is SAP provides a lot of options based off of, like you said, knowing your environment and thorough planning. One option being I can put SAP's technology on SAP's cloud. Another one being is SAP allows us to put their technology on any infrastructure, and there's no clear winner. It's just a matter of knowing your environment and what you need to do. So I'm really interested now in one click down. How should we think about actually connecting to these systems?
Well, that is a whole can of worms, and one that we, of course, have to dig into. But it's important to know that this is where things start to get even more complex. If you weren't already feeling like it was complex enough as it was, here's where you'll find that SAP, with all those different individual services, often has different APIs with different protocols and different access mechanisms, and even different documentation for all these different services. And so it can be really challenging to start thinking about, and really intimidating to start thinking about integrating with all that different data out there, all the different tools that you may need to connect workflow across. One of the things, though, that SAP has done to make that a lot easier, which I'm really happy they've done, it certainly made our lives easier when we were thinking about this demo, was that they have introduced their SAP API Business Hub. And that actually centralizes a lot of the resources you'll likely need to leverage, whether it's partner-driven APIs, centralized APIs to access, multiple different systems, or I think my personal favorite is the sandbox environment, which allows you to test a lot of those APIs and try them out, kind of work on your logic and your workflow a little bit, make sure that your syntax is right and you understand the documentation before you try to start implementing things in any of the Quickbase tools. I think that's also a really helpful set of options. Of course, very similar to the portal that we have for our RESTful API, but in this case, centralizing all sorts of different functionality across many, many, many different tools in the ecosystem.
Okay, so I'm hearing SAP Business Hub is really a portal that centralizes a lot of the APIs SAP has developed for creating integrations. And as that sandbox does sound awesome, a way to actually test those APIs before going into Quickbase. So I've got a really good foundation of the information I need to start planning and integrating my Quickbase environments to SAP. But really thinking about the Quickbase side, what do you think I need to do to prepare there?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the main thing that I want to highlight is actually before we even jump into Quickbase, there's actually a step that I like to take, and that's to actually start to collaborate with folks. And that's because really often it's easy to forget that SAP is a huge system and doesn't just have one administrator. Often it has a whole team of administrators because it's a centrally critical tool for your business. And so you really need to start by actually going and tracking down the different folks that you'll need to work with. And not only identifying who they are, but what the roles and responsibilities will look like, how much they're able to actually help you with your particular use case. So that's where that alignment comes in. Reviewing the requirements that you have with them will really be an important step because they'll be able to best guide you on different things like how to get access, and stuff like that. Now, beyond that, I also like to use this as an opportunity to make sure that we're assessing any risks and concerns. So once again, that IT team that administrates SAP is going to have a really deep understanding of the different security requirements, the different compliance requirements that might exist within your business. So they'll be able to help you flesh that out. And then at the end, this is just a personal best practice that I like to recommend, which is to establish an operating cadence where you've got regular check-ins with all the different people you're working with so that things don't get lost in the works. And that's often just because all these teams are actively managing lots of different things, lots of different moving pieces related to SAP. So having a bit of a normal cadence is really going to help you to make sure that this use case gets developed properly.
Okay, so we have SAP is a complicated environment. Therefore, there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of people involved. So it's really get your ducks in a row, get your processes in order, and establish how you're going to work before you actually go ahead and do the work itself. Got it. So what else should I be thinking about?
Well, I think now, to your point, it's time to start thinking about technical requirements. So here, what I like to do is start to think about how does my data actually need to move? So this is where we start getting into the specifics of your use case. And so you'll need to answer these questions for yourself. If I have a process, how does that data need to move? Do I just need to get data from my ERP? Maybe I've got a list of contracts that I need, and I just need to have all the different data about those contracts available to me in order to execute my process and let my team do their work. Or, is there a situation where instead of just that one direction, I need to actually have data get updated in my system, and for those changes then to be reflected back in SAP. And so now it needs to be bi-directional. So knowing how data needs to move because you understand the requirements of your use case is going to affect the strategy you implement. And not only that, but you also need to know the timing as well. Does that need to happen in real time, where as soon as a contract gets added to my system in my ERP, in this case SAP, I'm able to take a look at it in my Quickbase application? Or is it okay for that to refresh maybe on an hourly or daily, maybe even a weekly basis? Because I'm really just dealing with kind of large sets of data that don't change too frequently. So understanding the nuances of your particular use case are really going to help with all the next kind of steps you'll need to take to actually start implementing this from a technical perspective.
Oh, got it. So in the planning process, I'm going to identify kind of the key processes that I want to integrate. And then based off of that, we'll decide if we want them to be one way, both directional, and whether we need that information real time, or maybe it's okay to schedule them on some sort of hourly or daily basis. Cool. So how do we actually implement this in Quickbase? And can you share a little bit about how I should be thinking about who to involve in that implementation from a skill set standpoint?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different tools that once you've kind of identified your requirements, you can consider. And as I mentioned, with the scenario where I've only got data that needs to come in one direction, maybe it doesn't need to be updated too frequently. Well, we actually have our sync tool available, and that's something that is really helpful for pretty much anyone. I think that's the starting point for a lot of SAP integrations that we've worked on. The simplest possible solution is often to just get an export sent as a CSV file with the data that you need. Maybe that's getting sent in an email on a daily basis, and that's getting put into a FTP folder that our sync tool has access to and can bring in once a day. So for a lot of folks, just because that really requires no code, really very little setup, it's just, hey, can you get an export of data and put it somewhere that we can have access to it? That's the easiest place to start. Now, I think the next step, of course, is going to be our pipelines technology. And if anyone has spent some time with pipelines, you've probably seen me talking about this a ton already. And this is really, I think, the most flexible option we have, where you're going to be able to build out lots of different flexible automated workflow and connect that to SAP in this case, using SAP's APIs, but not necessarily requiring our APIs, that you can actually avoid having to write API calls for, because of course, pipelines is part of our ecosystem. So you can just connect right to an application and tell it exactly what to do without having to write any code at all. So we find that that's a great tool for folks who are a little technical as well, but also facilitates scenarios where you really need to get very in the weeds and build out some pretty robust API calls. You're using Jinja templates, so it spans the gamut. But the last thing I'll say is that, we also see plenty of, third-party consultants and folks building custom applications. And for those kinds of scenarios, it, of course, is still absolutely fantastic idea to use our RESTful API as well. And if you're going to be running your own scripts or middleware services that, can link Quickbase with SAP using APIs, that's also a fantastic example. I will say for today, we're going to focus on pipelines and some really cool things that you can use pipelines to do, and specifically in our demo. So that's actually, if you think about the requirements for the use case we've selected, that's the work that we went through. Is we kind of said, okay, pipelines is the tool for us. And so that's what you'll see in just a minute.
Okay, so when we started with high level, what is an ERP, down to focusing on SAP and some of the considerations, and now we've really introduced some of the mechanics of how to actually do it. So I think we're ready to get into the concept we've put together to highlight these principles. Can you introduce supply chain services and tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, supply chain services is of course a fictional company, does not exist. But we're all gonna say that we're working together today to help supply chain services, because they're actually dealing with a fantastic problem, which is that they're growing and there's an accelerating demand for their services. But that is leading to some challenges, as other folks may be familiar with. Once things start to grow out beyond your capacity to scale, things get a little bit more challenging. And so in this scenario, we're focused on their ability to process their purchase requests and keep up with the demand for supplies that is necessary to continue to run their operations. So they're managing purchase requests. We're going to help them out with that. A few key requirements: they need a customizable and kind of flexible way that's easy for people to actually submit purchase requests. So that's going to be done outside of their ERP. But when those requests are submitted, what we want is, of course, for that to actually be able to make its way into the ERP. We want to be able to add line items to that as well. And we'd also really like to be able to synchronize data, making sure that if you're submitting requests or making updates to those requests, that they're always reflected in SAP, and vice versa. If something changes, if finance goes through and processes or something and makes an update, procurement does the same. We want that to be reflected in the original request as well. So it needs to be bi-directional. So kind of going back to the steps that we talked about a moment ago, we've kind of defined a few of those requirements. We know pipelines is the right tool for this situation. So that'll be the scenario that Peter, we ask you to demo for us in just a moment.
All right, I'm itching to get into it and share how we're going to help supply chain services streamline this purchase request process. But before I jump in, is there anything else that might trip us up before we get into the process?
Ooh, I'm glad you asked. This is a meaty one. It's a little bit I would say unnecessary when you're going through your initial planning. But once you actually get to the point where you're ready to start trying things, you're building out API calls and you're getting into the more technical nitty-gritty, I think it's really important to start looking for design constraints. Go ahead, review the documentation that is out there for any of the systems involved, and look for any potential gotchas. And I'll just say, the ones that we ran into for our demo today, we actually had a few. We came across a few with our own tool, pipelines, here at Quickbase, where as you were building it, Peter, I think you'll remember having to kind of keep in mind that, hey, we can't have too many of the same pipeline triggering concurrently. If more than 30 of the same pipeline start running at once, it's going to cap itself. And then same thing, as we're going through and doing some of the work with Jinja to create expressions, we had to keep in mind that there's a 1 megabyte payload limit. And then if you track down some of the SAP documentation, you'll find it's similar. Every service out there has limitations for a very good reason. It's not because they're trying to make our lives harder. It's because these are specifically engineered systems. They have lots of moving pieces. And so this is to protect your data and make sure that your use case works properly. And so for SAP, same thing, make sure you've got an 8 megabyte payload or less in your HTTP post. And then the last one is making sure that your JavaScript requests, are kind of following within their parameters as well. So like I said, this is going to be true whether you're talking about SAP, Oracle, Microsoft Dynamics. Any tool that you come across is going to have limits. It can sometimes be a little tough to track those down, but it's absolutely worth it because it will influence the way that you build out your integration. And you never want to be caught in that scenario where you're getting error messages and you have no idea why.
I'm really taking away from this the importance of planning and understanding what you want to do before you go in and try to do it. So that was really helpful to understand, and check your documentation. So I'll drive for a bit here. We're going to get into a demonstration, and before we get into the demonstration, I want to share more on a one-click down technical level what we're actually going to do. And we're looking at the flow of the creation of a purchase request. So there's two environments, the Quickbase pipelines environment on the top two rows, and the SAP environment on the bottom row. And if you read left to right, this flow is going to start with adding a purchase request to Quickbase, which I'm going to show you in a second. Pipelines will trigger, and what pipelines is going to take care of a lot of orchestration. First being to request a token from SAP and a session handle, which pretty much gives us permission to continuously update SAP objects securely. Once we have that token, we're going to then go and grab the line items from Quickbase that we configure in the purchase request. And then we're going to use that tool Jinja that Adam introduced to actually build out a single API payload that makes a request to SAP to take the purchase item header, all of the line items into a single call. SAP is going to process that request and return a purchase request number that then we're going to take and update Quickbase with. And that's going to be important for subsequent requests to SAP where we want to make an update to a purchase request. We'll be able to do that because we have the SAP purchase request number. So in the demo environment, I'm going to walk you through some of the tabs I've got pulled up. We're going to create a purchase request here on the purchase request form. And the second tab, what we have is the actual pipeline where we're going to trigger off of a record being created and run through that flow. And then we have a second pipeline, which is going to capture an update and send an update to SAP. And then we're going to work through the SAP environment where we'll be able to actually access one of the Fiori applications to update or to view purchase requests and go in and actually see the purchase request that we created. So the last one I did was 132. You should see something like 133 after we're done here. Okay, so those are the tabs we're going to run through. Back on Quickbase, I've set up a new purchase request. This is going to be that agile, flexible environment to do a customization layer on top of SAP. And we're going to keep things pretty simple. We're going to have a description, a single line item. We're going to add a pump to the system, and we want it delivered perhaps in mid-July. So the idea here is we can sync this, and what that's going to do is it just shows you the traffic coming into pipeline. So saving this record triggers the pipeline to actually start running. And you can see detailed what we're actually doing. So we're grabbing information in record creation. We're making an initial request to the Quickbase API, a query to grab line item information. We find one line item, and then we're doing the request for a token from SAP and building out a payload. So that happens here in fetch JSON record. And you can see that at the very end of it, purchase request 133 was created. Just to go a little bit deeper into that, I'm going to take you to the call to SAP. The call to SAP has header information where we're passing in information from the token returned. And then here's the Jinja, where we're actually building out a payload based off of the request from Quickbase.
And that's something that you can actually test ahead of time in that API Business Hub, making sure that you've got that payload formatted correctly before we then implement it here in the pipeline, right?
And that's exactly what we did. A lot of testing in Business Hub to make sure we had the right call. And then once we had that call made, we can actually copy in all the information right into pipelines.
Perfect.
So we have a purchase request. So if I refresh my purchase request here, I can see that purchase request 133 was added. And then in SAP, if I were to go click on Manage Purchase Requisitions, that would take me to my Purchase Requisitions tab, and I can refresh this browser, and the latest set of purchase requests will be displayed. So you can see at the top that we have number 133 has been created, and in Power Demo, the description was passed in, and the line item was created, and you can see all the details here were updated as well. And the only other thing to highlight is, well, this is the scenario for creation of a purchase request. We also have a pipeline set up to handle an update of a purchase request. So similarly, if you can build out a custom purchase request. Sometimes it's an approval workflow where if you wanted to make a change to the purchase request, for instance, change the quantity or the date that you wanted it to be delivered, that would trigger a pipeline to run that actually then does an update process. And so in this case, it's a different combination of steps, but it's taking the purchase request changes and making an API call to update the purchase requisition. So if that finished off all right, we should see refreshing 133 that instead of one piece ordered, it's two or three, whatever the value I put in was. So you can see here that the change, we now have a quantity of 2. So, I mean, Adam, hopefully that demonstration made sense. Did that kind of check all the boxes?
Yeah, I think we've seen, we've got that customizable request form. We've got that ability to add line items. And of course, we're going to be able to make sure that, as things update moving forward, you've just got another trigger for those scenarios as well to kind of watch out for any circumstance where we need to go ahead and synchronize that data. So that's fantastic. We saw the line item get updated, when you made the change to the initial request. So I think SCS is going to be really happy with their ability to get purchase requests in the system, make sure that their line items are showing up and getting updated properly, and they're always staying in sync. So, they're not ever having to worry about, oh, hey, is the data in my Quickbase application, maybe not matching what's in my system of truth. So I think hopefully SCS is really happy. And I think hopefully everyone who's watching has a good idea now of how you might approach a use case like that. Just a couple of pipelines like you saw, but a lot of planning, really making sure we were really clear on what is the environment that we needed to get access to, and testing out those API calls ahead of time, like Peter mentioned. So with that, I'll just say that I hope everyone agrees that Quickbase and ERPs are a great fit. They really can work hand in hand to facilitate flexible processes that we as humans get to benefit from, but also still get to retain all of the fantastic benefits of those ERP systems, as long as we are making our plans correctly, doing legwork ahead of time, and bring in all the right constraints to our integration approach. And like I said, there's no one size fits all approach. Every use case is going to have a different set of requirements because ERPs are incredibly complex, but this will give you at least the right steps to take to be successful. So with that, I know we want to open it up for some questions. So we will take it away to questions and meet you there.